the newest science is really showing that you can get these profound benefits even starting later. So to your never too late, to my not too late, like I really want to drive that home. It's not just a kind of great marketing type phrase, but it's actually scientifically based. And so you can't start too young, like start now, right? But it's also like not too late. And I just want to, I've seen really deep and powerful evidence about this, even for people who started in their 70s and 80s.
Hello and welcome. Kate Champion here, and that's the voice of Gwendolyn Bounds. Today on Living Big Mindfully, we have an extra special, power-packed episode for you. We have Never Too Late meets Not Too Late. Yes, that's right. I am very excited to introduce Gwendolyn Bounds, or Wendy as she likes to be called. Wendy is a journalist by trade and author of the book Not Too Late, The Power of Pushing Limits at Any Age. And boy, does she embody that concept. Wendy shares her transformation from a skinny, scrawny kid to becoming a competitive athlete, which all began with a dinner party and a Google search. And then we jump right in, talking about finding and creating time, the power of consistency in taking small steps, and staying true to the essentials. We discuss the what, the why, and the importance of mastery, passion, and goal setting in midlife and beyond. And then Wendy gets super personal about the process, including all the messy life events and still somehow hanging on to her hopes and dreams. Plus, there are literally tons of tips and strategies for everyone, whether you're starting something new, trying to keep the motivation, or just interested in staying stronger for longer. For example, you'll learn about pushing your limits, intrinsic motivation, developing a growth mindset, and how having the will to live is important throughout the lifespan. Of course, Wendy wraps up our conversation with some wise sage advice. You know, everything we do here, from the podcast to the books to the communities, is all about supporting and inspiring you to live a longer, stronger, more intentional life. And wow, hanging out with Wendy was such an honor, so insightful and inspirational. I have learned so much and my bar has truly been raised, and I hope this conversation does the same for you. If you found this chat helpful, please subscribe to the show and go ahead, share it with a friend. It is truly a gift. Plus, remember, you can find the full episode with video on YouTube. This is a great place to subscribe and leave your questions and comments. I do read and respond to everything. Remember to check out the show notes for links to books and resources. And whether you are listening for the first time or a regular, please know I appreciate you, I support you, and I thank you so much for listening today. Okay, my friends, here's Wendy. Hello and welcome, Gwendolyn Bounds. I am so excited to connect with you today. How are you?
I'm great, Kate. And I've been thinking to myself ever since we first got introduced that you have the best athletic name I've ever heard, Kate Champion. You can't ask for more than that, right? Like just sets you up for success with that name.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So that Champion is actually a family name on my mother's side. And I use it as a pen name for, authors and websites and books and podcasts and things like that. But it is a family name, and I'm very proud of it. So thank you.
Yeah, well, it's working.
Tell listeners about you. I want to hear kind of more about your story, but I do want to say I'm excited to connect because you have a book called Not Too Late. I authored a book called Never Too Late, and I'm feeling like this is like the meeting of the minds, right? So Never Too Late meets Not Too Late, and I'm really excited to share this conversation today.
Absolutely.
All right. Go ahead. Tell us about you and your journey and how you got to this point.
Sure. Well, it's very unlikely that you and I would be having this conversation if we had met, let's say 10 years ago. I am a journalist by trade, a writer. I've long stint at the Wall Street Journal as a financial journalist, and then I ran the media at Consumer Reports, and now I'm working for a media tech startup. So a lot of screen time, a lot of sitting, a lot of computers and keyboards, and you know the drill, right? But athlete was nowhere in the descriptors that friends and family used for me. And I was really not, physical things were not part of my DNA until about 8 years ago, when I stumbled upon something called Spartan racing and obstacle course racing. And that's part of the story I tell in the book of Not Too Late. But it really was a pivotal moment for me of transforming from the things I thought I always was, and I had gravitated toward my competencies, which was stringing words together and telling stories. But I had never had any or much success at all on the physical side. And so, as you know from the book and just from your own experiences in midlife, right, to be able to shift gears and suddenly embrace something profound and new has a lot of benefits. And I think you and I will probably talk about some of those today.
Absolutely. So as you were talking, a couple of things came up for me. So in childhood, were you kind of sporty, outdoorsy, or were you really still inclined more to kind of, the written word and study? And tell me a little bit about the childhood culture. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Outdoorsy and sporty would, again, not be descriptors those people I grew up with would have used for me, nor myself. I was a bookworm. Like, I was curled up with my Trixie Belden mystery books. I was a skinny, gangly kid, often last pick for sports teams, spent a
Mhm.
lot of time warming the bench when I was on them and handing out water to my friends. I was kind of a gangly mess of of jumbled limbs that didn't quite piece themselves together. I think, Kate, I always knew sports had something to offer that I craved. I was born 1 year after Title IX was passed in the United
Mhm.
States, which gave women equal right to equal footing in athletics. And a lot of my friends were great athletes. It just didn't come naturally to me. And like I said, when we're growing up, we often gravitate toward what people praise us for. And so people praise me for the sentences I wrote and the stories I told. And so that's the route I followed. But again, it was not until later midlife adulthood that I began to sort of find or try to discover this other side of me. So yeah, not a sports kid growing up.
Got it. So Wendy, tell me about that shift because you talked about, sitting and writing and the journalist and a lot of screen time. So did you just wake up one day and have this epiphany, or was it over time? Was it a process? I want to get granular about what was the shift for you. I'm super curious.
Actually, I woke up one day and guess what? I grabbed a digital screen, a computer, and that's how this began. But I'll get to that in a moment. It truly began the night before at a dinner party where I had been, and I had overheard this older man asking a young girl, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Very natural question people ask children, and I heard it, and he was, I think, well into his gin when he was talking to her and asking her this question. But she just started spinning off all of these amazing things that she could be, like a veterinarian or a computer programmer or an artist, and on and on and on. And I just was listening. And suddenly later that evening, it stuck with me and it struck me that in middle age, no one is ever asking you that question again. What do you want to be? And more importantly, I think to the larger point, I wasn't even asking myself, right? I thought that I knew the things that I was good at. I knew who I was, and that's what I would be doing. Um, and so I was pretty unsettled when I went to sleep. And the next morning, as I mentioned, I woke up and, natural thing, I grabbed my computer. But instead of just kind of delving into email or work, and I really don't know what led to this sentence, but I typed into the Google search algorithm, what are the hardest things you can do? I mean, I think it was like a Hail Mary pass of my feeling like I still had something left in my tank and I just had no idea what it was. And the algorithm surfaced what are the hardest physical things you can do. And I clicked. And one of the things that popped up was this sport I had never heard of called obstacle course racing, Spartan racing. And I clicked on it and started reading. I thought, oh my God, these people are crazy. Like I could never do anything like this. It was endurance running through mountains and farm terrain. It's like cross country running combined with scaling walls and climbing ropes and carrying heavy things. And I thought these people are crazy. But I somehow just went down that rabbit hole. And by the end of that morning, I had signed up just to see, like, for a free Spartan workout of the day. And that was truly the beginning of what became an 8-year journey to get out of my cycle of sameness, doing the same things all the time as I think about, and to go down this path of trying to become a competitive athlete.
And I have to ask, kind of age range. So, how old were you when you had this moment where you started to where you signed up for this kind of free test run? What kind of age were you in life at that
Yeah.
point?
Well, I'll tell you specifically. So last week, or no, not last week, last month, I turned 53. And at that time, I was 45 or about to turn 45. So I had really, I had one foot firmly planted in the camp of midlife and middle age at that point, and was starting, I think, to ask myself some of the questions that many people do about, it wasn't that I didn't like my life. I loved my life, but you do get to a point where you're saying, well, is this is this it? Like, is this all I am and can be or will be? And then is it all just, I'm kind of dialing it in until the end? Or, and so I was asking all of those. I think those questions were swirling somehow in the background when I stumbled upon this thing.
Yeah.
My thing happened to be obstacle course racing. For other people, it will be something quite different. But that feeling is universal. And I think the universal question for all of us is then, what do we do with that feeling? And how do we begin to resolve it?
Yeah, and how, I mean, even language is super important to me, as it is, I'm sure, to you, but how do we honor that, right? How do we hear it, recognize it, and then take some steps to honor it, right? Because
Yes.
I do believe it's universal, and I also believe a lot of people push it aside and numb it, and they don't honor that, they don't listen, they don't lean in. So how do you actually begin to honor that for yourselves? It's such a powerful statement.
Well, built into what you're saying with this word honor, and I've never thought about it with that word, but I actually like that word a lot, is this notion of action, right? As you said, it's very easy to, maybe you hear it, maybe you feel it, but then inertia takes over. And inertia is an incredibly powerful thing, particularly when you have a lot of routines and obligations and habits already built up in midlife, to yourself, to other people. To step out of that and to find and create time is the honoring part, and it is the hardest part.
Yeah. Yeah. I so resonate with that because I started the backpacking thing at 55, and that takes a lot of time, right?
Absolutely.
Time. I don't go out for an hour or two. It's like day, half day, multi-day. And I mean, that is so true. It's finding the time, it's honoring that, and it's also, now it comes into, how do you begin to set boundaries? How do you begin to tell loved ones? How do you tell your spouse or your partner, well, hey, I've got this trip coming up. I really want to do this. And so have you had to do some of that too? I would imagine you have, and how have you handled that?
So, I mean, that is the key to how we're even having, this conversation at all. And in the beginning, was a little bit of, there were stages of it, right? In the beginning, it was just getting started and doing something and not worrying about having such a big plan or having all the right gear or
Mm.
knowing everything about the sport. It was really my waking, setting the alarm for 45 minutes earlier, and getting up before work and going out in my own backyard and trying to follow that Spartan workout of the day. I had no idea what any of the exercises were. Like, I didn't know what a bear crawl was. I mean, I was Googling these things bleary eyed on YouTube, and then, crawling around in my backyard like a wounded animal as my neighbors drove by. But then I'd get up and I'd go to work at Consumer Reports, where I was their vice president of content. And, I would have had this other part of my day that was this new part of myself, right? And even though I wasn't getting particularly good yet, I was doing something, right? I was beginning to feel like I was taking those baby steps. And that was so critical because, soon I'd be extra hungry at work and I'd need another breakfast, or I'd begin to feel these little baby calluses emerge on my hands, which I would feel under a conference
Mhm.
table in the middle of a presentation. And those were just, it was like my secret, but it was this thing that was starting like seeds that had been planted. But then over time, and as I got more serious, I had to really begin to figure out what was essential and what was non essential in my life. And I read a book by an author named Greg McKeown, who wrote about essentialism. And it's
Yeah,
really
I
about
read that book.
the disciplined pursuit of less. And I think of it as defining, what my crop was, right? I don't want to let my crop die. And my crop are the most important things in my world. And then there are other things that are not part of that. And those are the things I didn't tend to anymore. So figuring out what my true priorities were and isolating those, and then honoring, as you would say, my commitment to that, and being okay learning to saying no to myself of things I like to do. If it's spending a bunch of time scrolling on Instagram or social media, or serving on committees of things that maybe I like to do, but they weren't essential to this, like very much fine tuning that portfolio for myself was absolutely the only way that I got from point A to where I am now.
Taking a quick break to pause here and celebrate 50 episodes of the Living Big Mindfully podcast, which is amazing to me. And to celebrate the Big 50, I want to thank you. I want to celebrate you and all you are doing, working on, and being in the world. For a limited time, I have decided to give away 50 copies of my best-selling book, You Are Limitless: Anxiety, Grief, Trauma, Addiction, 7 Inspiring Stories of Hope and Healing. This book is so close to my heart and a great resource if you or a loved one is working on healing and creating a more intentional, heart-centered life. There is even a chapter dedicated to crushing those limiting beliefs. It's easy. Simply email me at katechampionauthor@gmail.com to request your download. I could not do this show without you. Your comments, reviews, shares, and support are appreciated more than you can ever imagine. So take a moment, jump onto that email me at katechampionauthor@gmail.com, grab your copy of the book, and share the show with your favorite people. Okay, let's get back to the conversation. So where are you now? Tell me about now. Tell me about Wendy today.
Yeah, well, so from that bear crawling around in my yard in a first race, which I didn't even compete in a competitive category, and I fell from the 17-foot rope and almost quit the race. Flash forward to today, and I think 53 races into this, and I am number 1 in the country for Spartan Racing for my age group for their national series race. And I am about to head to the World Championship in Sparta, Greece in early November. So it is a big, long path that took me from that moment of Googling and having no idea what the sport was to sitting here and sharing that information with you. And it's what embracing the road to try to master something new can be like, even at this age. And I think we sometimes think mastery is for when you start young. You need to put in 10,000 plus hours, and that's the only way you get there. I actually think mastery in midlife and beyond, or any age in the pursuit of it, is a fabulous thing because it's never ending in some ways. So it always gives you something new to wake up and think about and learn. And it just, when life starts to turn toward endings, you feel like there's like another beginning. And that's what this has been for me. And so I've certainly hit some of these milestones that I never would have imagined those words that just came out of my mouth to you about, being number 1 in a national series or going to a world championship. It's a foreign language on my tongue still.
Yeah.
But
And I want
more
to stop. I want to pause you there for a minute, because you rattled that off so quickly, almost like you were talking about somebody else. So I want to take a moment and I want to pause, and I just want to really soak that up. So would you say that again slowly? And then I want, what does that really feel like? What does that really feel like to have that as your reality today? Because that's massive.
I think you're better than my therapist. I'm going to switch. So say that slowly. I like that. Uh, So yeah, so let's first say, that Spartan race, like I raced for so long. I was the back of the pack, right? I remember the first big race I ever raced in competitively, and I think I was 20 out of 23 in my age group, like really slow and nervous and didn't feel confident. And I still feel a little bit nervous. I'm a lot nervous every time I line up at the starting line. But it's been years and these 8 years of work to get to this point. And so, what it means is in these three big races that were considered the three races of the national series, I competed in all three this year, and my overall ranking places me at number one for my age group. And, that is, again, almost inconceivable from where I was. But I think anybody, it's if people, if, race obstacle racing isn't going to be the thing for everybody. I'm sure you have the kind of milestone you never thought you were going to hit in the world where you push your own limits. I think for anything that we have passion for, and this is a whole separate sidebar topic we could talk about at some point, but like setting goals and moving the goalpost and adjusting the goalpost is on the road of mastery is really critical. I mean, I wrote a whole newsletter about this, and that's been part of it, is just keeping that goal. Not that I'm not content at each time I reach it, but knowing like that's not the end. And that's what's so wonderful about it, because again, it just gives me something to think about and aspire to, and keeps that cycle of sameness from getting in the way of well-being and happiness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So part of me wants to push you just a little bit more here. What is as you share with me that you are heading to, I think you said Greece, right, for the World Championships, right? And you said that, 8 years ago, you could not imagine. So I literally want you to like take a breath and tell me, what does that feel like in this moment? Are you just bursting with pride? Are you terrified? What is that like for that to be your reality right now?
What's interesting, as you ask, is that I think mostly what I am is just focused on training and getting ready, because I know how difficult it's going to be. It's going to be three races over 3 days, a 5K and then a 10K and then a 21K, back to back to back. And again, it's your collective time over all of those. That is, I mean, for some people who do ultra distance running, 100 mile, like, okay, that doesn't sound like a lot of mileage, but when you add in, 25 obstacles one day, 30 plus, and then 35 plus another day, it is a toll on your body. And so the way I feel right now is I need to be locked in and prepared. And that, I think if you had asked me that question and I had told you that 10 years ago, I would have been like, oh my God, the world, I have changed so much, and that the process is as important to me as thinking about the milestone. Like I mean, the process is what you live in every day. I will go to Greece. Yeah, I'll go to Greece and it will be over. I mean, and that's great. Like that is a telic thing. A telic means has an end. It will be a championship race and it will have an ending. But the thing that doesn't end for me is the process. So when you say, how do you feel? I feel like I'm just happy that tomorrow I'm going to wake up on a Saturday morning and go for a long run. And I have that process as part of my life. That's honestly, Kate, how I feel.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I love that, because I don't think I know from my own experiences too, and from working with people, that the process is everything, right? I mean, because there's so much, because that's internal, that's intrinsic, that's our stuff. Nobody can take the process away, right?
Right. And
regardless
yes,
of kind of what's not happening.
It's not dependent on some extrinsic outcome like a medal or a placement. And don't get me wrong, I'm very proud of those milestones. I mean, those are things where you can mark what your process has done for you, but that's certainly not the main thing that this process has done for me. And that's much deeper, right? And even if you're pursuing something you care about that doesn't come with placements or medals or podiums, that doesn't mean that process is not going to yield the same amount of joy, well-being, change, like personal, just waking up in the morning and feeling like you're settled and happy. Like that, you can get that from anything that isn't necessarily dependent upon a win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this, again, there's so much there. And I think, honestly, that's the one of the foundational philosophies of both of our books, right? That it is about the process. It is about following your heart. It is about creating this kind of heart-centered, intentional life that you take steps towards every single day. Yeah. And that is so powerful. And that is, to me, that is the road to contentment, right? That's the kind of the secret sauce, for me anyway, personally. Any thoughts about that?
I want to say, and I think you will agree, but I don't want to speak for you, that, it sounds correct and right and good when we say we take the steps every day. It doesn't mean it's easy. And I want to be super honest about that, because I don't want anyone who listens to us talk feel like if they are struggling to get rooted and get their passion or something they care about off the ground, that they're alone and there's something wrong with them. There's not, and I have days, as I know you do, where you wake up and you have all the best laid plans and things fall apart. And it takes understanding that that's okay. And then you have another day, and then or at the end of the day, you try and get something back on track. But life is not like the movies. You can't write a script where it's perfect, and the imperfection and being able to work through that and then still pick it back up the next day and not let yourself think, oh, I'm failing. Like that's really important. Because I think
Yeah.
sometimes we start talking about these things and it sounds like, and then I became an obstacle racing athlete and then I made it to the world championship. And it's just like so much got in the way, whether it's your parents are
Mm.
sick or you're struggling with your kids or you have a health crisis yourself or you lose your job. Like that's all going to happen. And it's
Mm.
like, can you still hang on to this thing in the back of your head? And if you have to pivot what your goal was for it, can you pivot that goal and still keep that thing in your life? So I just wanted to say that out loud because I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I love that. And again, it's really, it's honest, and you're right. I mean, you know, stuff is coming up constantly that could derail somebody, and certainly that's been the case in my life. But that kind of going back, right? That sense of sometimes having just to start over. Maybe it's 2 or 3 days and you haven't been able to get out there or get to the gym, and it's like this sense of this efforting, right? That it takes to start over. I mean, that is part of the process, and it is constant. And I think it is a normal, I hate that word, but that a typical part of any kind of process, right? Is this stopping, starting, stopping, starting, 2 steps forward, kind of 3 steps back.
Another way to look at it is, we're very, as humans, we understand what it's like to be on the rise of something. Like I'm getting better, I'm getting better. We
Mm.
know what it's like to have a failure and to fall. Like, but what it takes to stay where you are most of the time is on the plateau. You're just kind of going through the process and training, and you're not necessarily going like this, and you're not necessarily going like that, and finding that is what process is. It's really being able to stay on that plateau and work through that. And George Leonard writes about this in his very small but great book called Mastery. And I've thought a lot about finding comfort on the plateau of any new experience we're trying to get better at. So I would say that's another way to look at it.
Yeah. So what's coming up for me is you say that. For me, I call that the messy middle, right? It's like when you're writing a book, right? You get to this, if you've written a book, you got kind of gung ho, lots of creative energy in the middle, and then this in the beginning, right? And in the middle, you kind of die out, and it's like now you're wading through the mud, and it's an effort, and you've got to show up every day, and you've got to do all kinds of mental gymnastics to get your rear end and those fingers going on the keyboard, right? But there is
Yeah.
this messy middle in everything, in every project, in every process, and in every hope, in every dream. And so thank you again for expressing that. I think that's really important.
I don't know how you find your way through the messy middle or the plateau, but one of the things that I think is most helpful for me is trying to set a few things that I call are non-negotiable. And when it came to writing a book, because you're right, you hit a point where it's like you're in the messy middle and you just don't even want to sit down and you don't want to look at it. And I mean, my thing became, and I learned this from a great editor at the Wall Street Journal many, many years ago when I was much younger, but he had written a book and he said, when I went off to write my first book, he said, 500 words a day. They don't have to be good. They don't have to be great. They can even be bad, but you write 500 words a day. And then the next day you have something to go back and look at and shape. And it was really true. And even on the days of the plateau and the messy middle, I really tried to hold myself to that. So I didn't just it wasn't like there were going to be blank page after blank page and chewing on it and excuses to get up and go. And I've tried to make sticking to my routine of training to be as non-negotiable as possible. Now, of course, stuff comes up and sometimes you can't. But look, if I miss a workout one day, many days I'll try and double up the next day, or I'll try and make it up on my off day that it was already scheduled. There's ways to try and make the thing you love. If you're learning to swim and you didn't make it to the pool, like how can you get an extra hour the next time? If you are learning pickleball and you can't make it with your train, what is the way you make it something non-negotiable to yourself and make it up? And again, we're not perfect, and there's going to be times when everything just gets thrown out the window, but looking at it in that way, and holding yourself accountable in that way, I think that's one way through the plateau / messy middle.
Absolutely. And for me, when you talk about that, for me, it's like, okay, getting my shoes on and getting out there for 20 minutes, right? Even if I've had a tough day, kids are sick, everything's gone wrong, right? It's still, okay, I'm going to get out there and I put those shoes on, even if it's for 20 minutes, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be these big things, these small things. And in fact, one of the things I saw on your Instagram was like, even the small steps make a difference, right?
Yeah.
And that is so powerful, so powerful.
I do. And I think we think everything has to be about the big giant steps, but honestly, a lot of the little tiny steps you make are the things that build your foundation, right? I mean, you look at a house, when a house gets built, we all look at, oh, what's the wall color and how many windows does it have? But underneath there's like these joists and girders and a foundation, a concrete foundation that are the thing holding it up. Those, they're not little size wise, but the little things we don't see are actually the foundation of whether that house is going to last. And so I really tend to the little things in my training, whether it's, my mobility of my hips and the strength of my feet. I mean, all these things that seem so boring, right? As opposed to I'm not doing a pull-up, or I'm not carrying something heavy, or I'm not running, but those are the foundation. And I think, I assume with people who are learning to play chess, or to knit, or to sail, like for the first time, there's a similar foundation, and paying attention to those little things is what ultimately will make you good at what you do and have you endure in it.
Yeah. So I think I'm hearing the little steps and the consistency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of showing up, whether you feel like it or not, whether you're overwhelmed, overloaded, whether you're right. I mean, just the consistency is so vital.
And you'll do it if you love it, right? I mean, I think the first question people are always sort of asking is, how do I know what is the thing to do? And it's got to be the thing that makes you, it's not like I didn't choose this because I thought, oh, I want to be a Spartan racer. When I first read about it, I was intrigued. I thought it sounded super hard, but it wasn't until I crossed the finish line in my first race that I knew. And something, I mean, this is a little bit of a cliche, but allow me a pass for it. Like I honestly felt like something in my DNA shifted. And so it became the thing that I thought about last before I went to sleep, that I wanted to wake up early for, that I wanted to turn off Netflix and watch training video. Like I just I loved it. And so if you have something you love, it's a heck of a lot easier to stick with it and have that consistency and bear with the little steps because you just love it. And so what do you love, right? And it doesn't have to be what other people think is great or hard or big or important. It's what you love to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you find that, I think people know, right? There's a feeling in the body. There's an opening, there's an excitement, there's an energy that's kind of created when you kind of like feels like one of a puzzle pieces kind of clicked in, right?
Yeah.
It just,
Yeah. But isn't
you
that
know,
true
it's
with so much?
congruent, thoughts, feeling. Oh yeah,
Totally.
yeah,
Totally.
absolutely. Yeah.
Relationships, if you're box checking, if you're making lists about people you're dating and checking boxes on and off, then you haven't found the right person, right? If you have a
Yeah.
job offer, like, generally, I mean, let's put the obvious things aside like money, but if whether like you're
Mhm.
excited and gung ho and like trying to talk
Yeah.
yourself into a relationship versus or try to talk yourself into being interested in a passion because you think, oh, everybody's doing this, I should do this. Like that's just a surefire way to make yourself more unhappy, I think.
Yeah. And it's not going to work, right? It's just not. It's just you're not going to be able to get into that flow. You're not going to get into that process. You're not going to put those shoes on every day or do the push-ups or pull-ups or whatever it happens to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have a question. Two things are coming up, and I don't know. You can choose not to answer them. That's fine. But I am curious about gender and age, right? So you're a female in a pretty male world, right? Let's face it, there's Tough Mudders and the Spartans, probably pretty male dominated. And you're now 50. How old are you now? 50, 53? I think
53.
you said 53. Okay. So how, what have been the joys and challenges around kind of age and gender, if any?
So it's my answer is not going to be what you think. So Spartan is actually quite equal and mixed with gender, and in fact, probably I think if you were to ask the whole community who the greatest obstacle racer potentially of all time, I mean, one of the names that would come is certainly a female who is just
Mm.
she was a woman who just dominated the sport year after year. She's having a kid now, but so I'm going to answer your question differently, in which I love the equality of this sport, and I love the fact that on the race course, I have never once experienced anything feeling like the men disrespected the women, not at all. Because quite frankly, we're all out there doing the same thing. Now the men are carrying heavier weight, but we're running the same course and we're doing the same obstacles. So there's just an equality to it. And you'll see a lot of women passing men. I mean, and you will see and I think when you get to my age group, in fact, Spartan told me this statistic, which I found was incredible, that I think the majority of people who race in quote age group competitions, not people who just run the open races, which are fun, but you're not competing for the podium, but people who race competitively in age group, I think the largest age group is 50 plus for women and
Is it
men.
really?
Yeah. And so I think that, I mean, that to me is incredible. And to some degree, like
Incredible.
the women who are a category older than I am, they're actually better than my category right now. They're faster. And so now to some degree, there's survival of the fittest and attrition, right? They've made it this long. And so you're going to be a pretty good athlete at that point if you're still racing. On the other hand, one of the things, Kate, I think about this, and again, I don't work for Spartan, and I'm not employed by the obstacle course racing industry. But one of the things that I think is pretty neat about it is that it's a sport that makes you fit for life and all of life's other activities. So you need to bend down and get the ball that rolled under the bed from the dog. Well, mobility is critical, and you do that. You've got to be able to crawl under barbed wire in a Spartan race. If you want to pick up your grandkid or your kid and hold them or swing them, I mean, that's a critical thing for picking up buckets of rocks and carrying them for a distance in a Spartan race. Respiratory fitness, muscle strength, all the things that we really need to tend to as we age, those are priority in this sport. So I do think women and men gravitate toward it pretty equally. And I also think they get similar benefits from it as they age, which may be one of the reasons you see so many people my age racing. So it's a great question, and I'm very happy to answer it probably in the way you didn't expect.
No, I love that. And quite frankly, kind of a sense of just inspiration, right? I mean, that is really inspirational with regard to, okay, not too late, never too late. And this philosophy around this lifelong fitness, right? Trying to be stronger for longer, right? And this sounds like an amazing platform and so inclusive,
It is.
which is beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And you can start like you start where I did, where you knew nothing, know nothing, and you can run in a short 5K open race. You can skip obstacles if you have to. And I mean, it's just, you can learn. You can ease your way into this, but it will be challenging, right? And that challenge is what makes you feel something when you cross the finish line. And the other thing I would say on age is that, you have at I don't know how old you are. At my age, you have crystallized intelligence, right? You have wisdom stored up, and that wisdom can be a real help to you in learning something new. I have found it to be quite helpful to me in obstacle course racing. I have found the fact that I have a lot more patience than I did in my 20s.
Mm,
Really an edge and an equalizer for me. And I take nothing for granted. So there will come a point inevitably in some of these longer races where, a bunch of guys who are in their 20s will go out hot, women too. And then by middle of the race, those of us who've started later in the older age groups, will pass them because they're just crashing and burning.
yeah.
And it's not that they don't,
Yeah.
they probably got bigger muscles and, they're certainly got a lot, but they didn't train, right? They don't know they haven't prepared and done the little things. They also may just not have mentally built up the capacity to endure and keep going, which I think
Yeah.
as you grow older, you
Yeah.
cultivate.
That's interesting. That's also been my experience, right, with kind of trail running and races and things like that. Again, I'll start out slow, but by the time you're into mile 10 or 20 or whatever, you are really passing a lot of the kind of this, the tortoise and the hare thing, right? I mean, it's really that. And I think you're right. That does come with wisdom. That does come with age.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what have been some of the challenges for you? What have been some of the things you've really had to push through? And I'm kind of putting this on me a little bit, but just I'm thinking about upper body strength. That's often a challenge for women. So what have you really had to kind of work on and push through, and what's been difficult?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with physical, like the physical, like you talked about, and then we'll talk about some of the non-physical parts of it, which I think are equally true for folks. But I mean, certainly upper body strength. I mean, when you and I have been throwing around the word pull up, but let me be clear, I couldn't even come close to doing a pull up 8 years ago, right? I mean, I had to get resistance bands and tie them around a pull up bar and really, really build and put my knee in them to offset my weight and build into that. I mean, that is very significantly difficult for women. Like pull ups and push ups, those come much more easily to men than they do to women. And so I have worked really hard to build my upper body strength. And to the degree where I had for a while a little pull-up bar that I bought on Amazon, and I hung in off a doorway right in my house, and I used that, and I had to tuck my knees up. And then as I got more serious, I would go to playgrounds and I would use the free pull-up bars there or at recreational centers. And now I actually have a grown-up pull-up bar in my garage, which I converted into a gym during COVID. But so it was all progressive, but that upper body strength is super important. So is grip strength, which we know grip strength is one of those things that indicates to some degree longevity. We know for women in particular that muscle mass is supremely important to their health as they age, and that you have to fight like hell to maintain it, right? You have to really
Yeah.
work to maintain it
Yeah.
or it's going to go away.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever gotten a DEXA scan, but they measure your bone density and your lean mass. And so every year, like I track that to see, am I still able to gain and put on some lean mass, and I think people should really pay attention to that for their own health. So I'd say that's number one. And then the second bucket is respiratory fitness. And
Mm.
not just for sort of zone 2 cardio, like, running for a long time with a kind of, middle lower heart rate. That's super important. But it's also important to work on the upper edges, what they call something, if people can Google this, VO2 max, right?
Mm.
sort of the maximum, that you can do, the maximum speed you can go for a certain amount of time. Both things are important. And I've added I think of it now as training for like the rest of my life. Yes, I'm going to run some obstacle course races, but this is just part of I want to be able to do certain
Yeah.
things if and when I hit 70 and 80.
Yeah, yeah. Again, longer, staying fit for longer, right? It's like this longevity over the lifespan. So you also mentioned some of the psychological piece, the emotional piece. Tell me, tell me about that because yeah, I'm sure there's a big component there.
Yeah, I will. Let me give one more beat because I don't know the age range of your audience, but one of the pieces of research that I found that was so interesting for my book, Not Too Late, was that science and research used to indicate that we needed to start young to get these benefits. And when I talked to, there's a man named Stephen Ostad, who's one of the leading authorities on aging in our country. And he said to me that the newest science is really showing that you can get these profound benefits even starting later. So to your never too late, to my not too late, like I really want to drive that home. It's not just a kind of great marketing type phrase, but it's actually
Mhm.
scientifically based. And so you can't start too young, like start now, right? But it's also like not too late. And I just want to, I've seen really deep and powerful evidence about this, even for people who started in their 70s and 80s. And I was just home in North Carolina with my parents for 3 weeks, and they're both 80. And I was in the gym with them 3 days a week, working with them on strength training. I bought them a personal trainer. Like that was my gift to them for Christmas. And so, and they're doing it, and I can see differences. I can see changes. So
That's
just
powerful.
wanted to hit
Yeah.
that button one time.
No, thank you.
Yeah, on the mental side, there's a couple of things. One, I never felt this, but I had another podcast host ask me this, and I remember I was like, wow, I didn't feel this, but boy, that's an interesting thought. They said, did you ever feel silly and like people were laughing at you because you were in middle age trying to do something like this? And I never felt it. Now, in part, it may be because of what I said to you earlier about this specific sport being egalitarian. On the other hand, I think the ability to be okay looking foolish, which I'm sure I have done a million times, like, that's one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself to learn something new. Like, who cares, right? I mean, just being okay with looking silly as you learn something. I think we're more comfortable with that when we're younger, but then we get to be
Mhm.
middle-aged and we've got our hand on the master control switch and we want to be dignified and people should respect us. And it's just like blah, blah, blah. So, I think that mentally is a really important thing to think about. Like, just who cares? Don't worry about it. And the truth of the matter is, everybody probably looks silly in their own way, and everybody's thinking about themselves and how they look, and they're not thinking about how you look. So don't worry about it. So that's number one on the mental side. Um, and number two, we talked about time. So I don't think we have to go back over time. And we have a lot of responsibilities at this age. And so you and I talked a little bit about time management on that front. I think the other thing, and this may be ageless to some degree, but when you get thrown for you get thrown a curveball you didn't really see coming. So after my first race, and right after my second race, I was diagnosed with melanoma on my leg, which is a particularly deadly form of skin cancer. And I was super lucky because I'd been going to a dermatologist once a year. I had health care. They called it early. Surgery was able to remove it. But it was, 4 inches down my leg and out of my leg, took me out of commission for a little bit. But again, very, very fortunate. But that threw me for a loop mentally because it was my sort of first real brush with serious mortality, like for me, and this notion of I wasn't necessarily going to be able to control how and when I leave this earth. And I had a hard time reconciling that and having this pastime, this new thing I loved, and having it be something that was physical was really crucial to sort of bringing me back to ground me. And because I felt like when I was training or getting up to do this thing, it wasn't just a distraction, but I was taking some control back over my life and my body. And I wasn't just waiting for the next shoe to drop. And I'm sure so many people out there who are your audience and everywhere, we're all just one phone call away from something that just upends our life.
Yeah.
So that's just the other thing I would say is
Mm,
how the thing you love can still fit in and be a part of you and helpful to you and a net for you if you fall or get tripped up by something like that. So I just wanted to bring that up.
yeah. Yeah. No, those are great tips and strategies. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, so I want to just kind of take a breath for a moment. I want to check in with you. How are you doing? How are you feeling? How's this conversation going? Yeah, I'm just
Yeah, you're
curious
both,
what's coming.
yeah, therapist, life coach, a physical coach. Take a breath. How are you doing? I'm doing great. I'm interested. I think the topics we're talking about are very applicable to so many people, whether or not they, again, are embracing athletics. And I hope everybody does something physical to the extent that they can. But again, I do believe people have different passions, and all of these ideas are, we should all be chewing on these.
Yeah, yeah. So my last kind of question is like how some steps to kind of begin to kind of find your purpose, right? If people are really stuck and maybe they're listening today, what are some tips and strategies from to way back in the beginning? Because you're at the office desk, or maybe you're semi-retired or whatever, and you're not really excited, you're not really kind of in the flow of life, you're a little bored, a little stale. What might be some tips and strategies to kind of dig in and experiment?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing which we started to talk about was this intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, right? Something, when you find something you love and are motivated by, in my case, I was a skinny, scrawny kid growing up, and the idea of getting strong was like, wow, this is amazing. And I want to try and do this. Like, I was driven by that versus I want to get on a podium, because that would have been short lived. Or if I had just been like, I want to complete one Spartan race and get a finisher medal, like that too would have been extrinsic and short lived. So what is the thing, as I said, that's going to get you to think about it at night and to wake up in the morning? So that's number one. I think number two is Carol Dweck, who is a psychologist at Stanford University. She's very famous, and she talks a lot about the growth mindset and
Mm,
believing that do you have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? And many people may have heard of this, but a growth mindset means you believe that your skills aren't necessarily just fully baked when you're born, right? That you can acquire skills and aptitude for things through hard work. So thinking about that, like, and adding on the word yet to things. So if you think, oh, I'm not an artist, I'm not an athlete, you can just say, yet. And I think that just shifts the mentality a bit. So I think that's another strategy for that. We talked about prioritizing what's essential earlier on, and I think that's crucial for the time management part. And we hinted around this notion of what are the edges and the equalizers that you can find at whatever age you are, whether it's your crystallized intelligence and your wisdom, or things that or do you have patience? What are your internal attributes, right? That you have? Are you funny? Are you determined? I mean, again, like the list goes on, and attributes are very different than skills. How do you tap into those? And the last thing I think is just great to think about is, will to live. Will to live is something that is actually been shown in research to add longevity to our life. And out of Yale, at Yale, there's a woman named Becca Levy, who she's also an author, who's a researcher there. And she has done multiple studies that have shown that driving the will to live can add actually 7.5 years to your life on average. That's a pretty powerful number. And so I think thinking about that, and do you have a will to live, and being, as you have said, honoring it, honoring your decision to figure that out, however long it takes. I think that is fundamental to this, Kate.
yeah, and I want to add a little piece of that too. And you can do all of this at any age, right? Age is not a limitation to any of these things that you've mentioned, right? It's not a limitation to, figuring out the essentials, finding your skills and attributes, really embracing the will to live, right? these are important things throughout the lifespan, in 60 and 70 and 80.
And they will be important in whatever the next thing is, if I'm lucky enough to have time to do a next thing. And I want to be clear that I'm not looking for a next thing to look for a next thing, but I'm also a realist, open-ended, like
Right.
amount of things to do. And that gives me will to live.
Yeah.
I don't know. It could all end tomorrow, but at least right now, talking to you, I
Yeah.
can feel that by thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just a really powerful feeling to connect with, right? Because it's full of hope and possibility. And yeah, it's a great energy, great energy. So, wow, what a powerful conversation. Talking about powerful feelings, powerful conversation. My last question is, well, two questions. Is there anything else you want to add? And then I want to ask you my sage advice question. Anything else to add, share? I should have asked, but didn't ask.
Yeah, I'll say one thing, and that's about relationships with the people in your life when you're embracing something different. And if you
Mm,
have someone in your life who's embracing something different. So I don't think I did a great job explaining to all the people I loved in my life why I was doing this, because I don't think I fully understood why it was so deep rooted until
mhm.
honestly until I sat down to write the book and processed it all. I'm lucky I had people in my life who loved me enough to stick with me through this and were secure enough that they didn't think I was doing this because I didn't want to be married to them, or I didn't want to be their best friend, or I was changing
Mm,
as their daughter in some fundamental way. But I think talking about it out loud is really important if you're that person who's going through the new thing, because you're upending the dynamic of your relationship.
yeah.
So you need to talk about it, and you need to explain to, and if so long as this is true, that what you're doing isn't about not wanting the things you have with them. It's just about adding something else to your life. And conversely, I think it's really important for us to not try and hold people back that we love if they're doing it, and not to think, well, they're going to leave us. Like they're doing this because they're rejecting the life we have together. Supporting that is super important. And I see that become a tension between people sometimes. So I'm just calling it out for the awareness factor.
No, I love that. And thank you for mentioning that. And I work a lot with couples as well. So yeah, I see that. And when you've imagined being partnered with somebody for 10 or 15 years and it's been this way for all that
Yes,
long, right?
yes,
And then somebody does what seems suddenly like a pivot. It's like,
yeah,
what the heck? And it shakes the whole system up. So that kind of communication is vital. Yeah. And communicating, if you can, from a needs perspective, right? This is something I need. This is something that's really important to me, and this is, I'm really feeling driven, and I'm yeah. Versus you, or right. So really communicating your needs, and then having some conversation around that is really important. And probably ongoing conversation, right? And then you have to hear their needs, right? You
yeah.
have to hear their needs, their concerns, their worries, their insecurities, because they might have some too. But I think most couples can probably work through that.
I think so if they're aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, sage advice. If you had one piece of sage advice about living intentionally, what would you share with listeners? And it can, again, can be about anything global.
I don't think what I'm going to say is going to have anything to do with obstacle course racing or physicality
Okay.
or the things we've been talking about. But I think we started this conversation off talking about sitting and screens and not being, to some degree, physically present in ourselves. But I also think to some degree we're not that physically present with other people now because of it. And so for me, one of the things I have really been thinking about lately and noticing how much it changes the expression on someone's face is when you look somebody in the eye when you're in the same room with them, and I'm not just talking about people, like, okay, you should not checking your device all the time, not looking down, not being at a dinner table and you're both scrolling through your text feeds. Like I hope that's obvious that we all need to work on that. Going to the drugstore and you look at the clerk across the counter, and do you see them? Like, do you really see them? Do you look them in the eye? Do you say thank you? Do you smile at them? Like, do you actually look somebody in the eye? Do you know that's a human being with all sorts of hopes and problems just like you on the other side. And even just a blip of connection like that, where you honestly, you see somebody and you let them see you. Like, I'm not a touchy-feely person, but I tell you, that's a tactical, real thing to do. And you watch how it changes the dynamic of how that person feels and looks at you. And even if it's for an instant, to me, that's one of the most mindful things we can do.
Yeah. And if I can, I want to tack a little piece onto that. So it connects with them and it connects with you, right? I mean, there's a shift, there's a communal shift in that moment, right? When you're making eye contact, just commenting on the sweater, you're opening the door, you're saying please, you're saying thank you, right? There is like a kind of a communal connection that is so vital, so vital. So
I
thank you for
agree. I
sharing
mean,
that.
it turns a mundane exchange into something that actually, for a second has some meaning to it. So, yeah. So thank
Yeah,
you for asking that.
yeah,
That's a good question.
yeah. You are very welcome. And talk about thank you. Where can people find you, Wendy? Where can people track all the amazing things you're doing? Where can people connect with you, ask questions?
Sure. Fastest way is my website, which is gwendolynbounds.com. And there you'll find the ability to sign up for my weekly Substack newsletter, which is called Not Too Late. All of my social handles are there, and place you can buy Not Too Late, my book, anywhere. So that's the fastest and best place to go. And I'll also say
Fantastic. I
right
would
now,
encourage. I'll put links.
yeah, they put links in, and also just to note that anyone who buys the book right now, this is on my website. You can get a code for a free Spartan race if you want to try it. So they're not inexpensive races, so it's a pretty great deal if this is something you're thinking, oh, I've always wanted to give it a shot. So if you're there's a link again to click down and fill out the form, and you just share the order number, and you get the code for the free race.
Wow, that's quite an offer. So anybody that's thinking about trying to flesh things out and find their purpose, you can kind of play around with that a little bit. So thank you. And thank you, Wendy, for this really helpful, important conversation today. I appreciate you and your time and all you're doing for aging and longevity and people in general. So thank you.
Right back at you, Kate. You're doing a wonderful job with all your messages, and I'm so glad that our paths kind of wound together to hit here today.
Yeah, I'm excited about following you and seeing how it goes.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening. I truly appreciate you and your time. I love to hear from listeners, so connect with me at katechampionauthor.com. Remember to grab your free hiking guide, and please take a quick moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Thanks so much. Take care. Until next time. Hey, me again. Just a reminder, this podcast should not be considered professional advice. It's also not a substitute for mental, physical, or any other healthcare-related treatment. For any questions about your condition and or concerns, please contact a fully licensed healthcare professional. Thank you.